The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street, where broken glass sparkled like scattered diamonds on the warm asphalt. Steam rose from the crumpled hood of a blue sedan, its front bumper twisted at an unnatural angle. The other vehicle, a pickup truck, sat sideways across the crosswalk, its driver already standing by the roadside, gesturing animatedly into his phone. Emma Mitchell sat on the concrete curb, her world spinning in slow motion. Her left arm throbbed with a dull ache, and she could taste copper in her mouth, where she'd bitten her tongue during the impact. The sounds around her seemed muffled, as if she were underwater. The distant wail of approaching sirens, the murmur of gathering onlookers, the persistent hiss of her car's radiator. She stared at the debris field before her, trying to piece together what had happened. One moment she'd been driving to her weekly therapy appointment, thinking about the presentation she had to give at work tomorrow. The next, she was watching her life unfold in a series of violent jolts and the explosive sound of metal meeting metal. The sirens grew louder, and Emma looked up to see a police cruiser pulling up to the scene. The emergency lights painted everything in alternating red and blue, creating a surreal carnival atmosphere that made her feel even more disoriented. She watched as the patrol officer emerged from his vehicle, moving with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen this scenario countless times before. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair visible beneath his patrol cap. His uniform was crisp, professional, and he carried himself with the quiet authority that came with years of experience. Emma found herself focusing on these details, grateful for something concrete to anchor her scattered thoughts. "Ma'am, are you okay?" His voice was gentle but authoritative as he approached her. "Any pain in your neck or head? Dizziness?" Emma tried to respond, but the words seemed to stick in her throat. She managed a slow nod, then immediately regretted the movement as a fresh wave of dizziness washed over her. The officer's eyes were kind, she noticed. There was something about them that made her feel safer, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. "Let's take a look at that arm," he said, crouching down beside her on the curb. His movements were careful, practiced. "I'm Officer Reynolds. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emma Mitchell." "Okay, Emma, you're doing great. The paramedics are on their way, but I want to make sure you're stable first." He reached up and removed his patrol cap, running his hand through his hair as he studied her injuries. It was a simple gesture, something she'd probably seen 1,000 police officers do in movies and real life. But when he looked back at her, Emma's world tilted on its axis. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. Because those eyes, those impossibly familiar brown eyes, belonged to someone she'd mourned for 10 years. Someone whose funeral she'd attended, whose grave she'd visited every year on the anniversary of his death. Alex. The name escaped her lips like a prayer, so quietly she wasn't sure she'd actually spoken it aloud. The officer froze. His hands, which had been reaching toward her injured arm, stopped mid-motion. Very slowly, he turned to face her fully, and she saw her own shock reflected in his expression. "Emma?" His voice was different now, uncertain, as if he were trying out a word in a foreign language. "Emma? Mitchell?" The tears came then, hot and sudden, streaming down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Alex, oh my God." Alex, you! We thought you were dead. We buried you. I was at your funeral." The words tumbled out in a rush, each one more desperate than the last. Officer Reynolds, Alex, sank back on his heels, his face pale beneath his tan. I don't understand. You're Emma Mitchell, from Riverside High School. You had that little scar on your chin from when you fell off your bike when you were 8. Without thinking, Emma's hand flew to her chin, to the faint white line that had been there for over 20 years. "You remember," she whispered. "I remember everything," he said, his voice breaking. "Jesus, Emma, I remember everything. But how is that possible? How are you here? How am I here?" The scene around them seemed to fade away. The flashing lights, the curious onlookers, the approaching ambulance. It was just the two of them, siblings separated by a decade of grief and loss, staring at each other across an impossible gap. "What happened to you?" Emma asked, reaching out tentatively to touch his arm, as if he might disappear if she moved too quickly. "The army told us you were killed in Afghanistan. There was a roadside bomb. They said there wasn't enough left to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Alex closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. "There was a bomb," he said quietly. "I remember the convoy. I remember the explosion. But after that—" He opened his eyes and Emma saw a confusion there that mirrored her own. "After that, it's like someone erased 3 years of my life." 3 years? "I woke up in a medical facility outside Kabul. The doctors said I'd been in a coma for months. Traumatic brain injury, they called it. I couldn't remember my name, couldn't remember anything about who I was before. They had my dog tags, but—" He shook his head. It was like looking at someone else's life. Emma's heart broke for him, for the lost years, for the brother who'd been stolen from their family. "Why didn't you come home? Why didn't you contact us?" "I tried," Alex said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I finally started remembering fragments, faces, voices, little pieces of a life I couldn't quite grasp, I tried to find my family, but the record said I was dead. There was a death certificate, a burial. According to the military, Staff Sergeant Alex Mitchell died in that explosion. But you didn't die." "No, but the person I was before, he might as well have. I couldn't prove who I was. The military said there had been a mistake, that I was probably another soldier who'd lost his identification. They gave me a new identity, processed me out of the service as John Reynolds. I spent 2 years trying to convince anyone who would listen that I was someone else, but without proof." Emma reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her wallet. From it, she extracted a worn photograph, Alex in his dress uniform, smiling broadly at the camera. It had been taken just before his deployment, at their parents' house. She held it up beside his face. The resemblance was undeniable, but there were differences too. Alex was leaner now, his face marked by experiences she couldn't imagine. There was a thin scar running from his left temple to his jaw, and his eyes held a weight they'd never carried before. "I kept this with me," she said, her voice breaking. "Every day for 10 years. Mom and Dad, they couldn't handle it. They moved to Florida after the funeral. They said staying in the same town was too painful. Are they? They're alive. Broken, but alive. Mom never got over losing you. She still sets a place for you at Christmas dinner." Emma laughed through her tears. "She's going to faint when she sees you." Alex stared at the photograph, his hands trembling slightly. I became a police officer because it felt right somehow. Like I was supposed to be helping people, protecting them. But I never understood why until now. It's what I always wanted to do, wasn't it? Even before the army. You used to say you wanted to be a cop when you grew up. Mom has home movies of you playing with your toy police car when you were 5. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Alex, what happened to you over there? How did you survive when they said you died? Alex was quiet for a long moment, and Emma could see him struggling with memories that were clearly painful. There were 4 of us in that Humvee, he said finally. We hit the IED about half a mile outside of Kandahar. The explosion flipped our vehicle. Williams and Jackson died instantly. Thompson ... He paused, his jaw tightening. Thompson survived long enough to drag me out of the wreckage before he died. The military said there were no survivors. There weren't supposed to be. By the time the rescue team arrived, I was barely breathing. They assumed I was dead too. But there was a local doctor, an Afghan man named Bashir Ahmadi. He'd been treating wounded soldiers in secret, running a small clinic in the mountains. His people found me and brought me to him. Emma listened in stunned silence as Alex continued his story. Dr. Ahmadi had kept him alive through weeks of touch-and-go recovery. The head injury had been severe, causing massive swelling in his brain. For months, Alex had existed in a twilight state between consciousness and death. When I finally woke up, I couldn't remember anything. Dr. Ahmadi said I kept asking for someone named Emma, but I couldn't remember who you were. I couldn't remember my own name. Alex's voice was barely audible now. He kept me safe for over a year while I recovered. When I was strong enough, he helped me get to the American base. But by then, I'd been officially declared dead. My unit had moved on. The war machine doesn't stop for ghosts. Now, why didn't Dr. Ahmadi contact the military sooner? He couldn't. The area where his clinic was located was controlled by the Taliban. If they'd found out he was helping American soldiers, they would have killed him and his entire family. He risked everything to save my life. Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward this man she'd never met, this stranger who'd given her back her brother. Is he still alive? I don't know. I tried to find him after I got back to the States, but Alex shrugged helplessly. Afghanistan isn't the kind of place where you can just look someone up. They sat in silence for a moment, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd learned. Around them, the accident scene continued to unfold. Paramedics had arrived and were checking on the other driver. A tow truck was hooking up Emma's car, and curious onlookers were beginning to disperse. "I can't believe you're here," Emma said finally. "I can't believe you're alive." "I can't believe I remember," Alex replied. "For 10 years, I've been living with these fragments of memory, these pieces of a puzzle I couldn't put together. But seeing you, it's like someone turned on a light in a dark room." Emma studied her brother's face, seeing both the boy she'd grown up with and the man he'd become. "What do we do now?" she asked. "How do we even begin to explain this to people?" Alex considered this. "I don't know, but we have time to figure it out. We have the rest of our lives to figure it out." "The rest of our lives," Emma repeated, tasting the words. I liked the sound of that. A fellow officer approached them, his expression concerned. "Reynolds, everything okay here? You've been sitting with the victim for a while." Alex stood up, helping Emma to her feet. "Everything's fine, Martinez. Actually, it's better than fine. This is my sister. Officer Martinez looked confused. Your sister? But didn't you say you didn't have any family? I thought I didn't, Alex said, his arm around Emma's shoulders. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. Emma leaned into her brother's embrace, feeling safe for the first time in a decade. The accident that had brought them together seemed like a small price to pay for this miracle. Her car could be replaced, her injuries would heal, but having Alex back, having her family whole again, was worth any price. I need to call Mom and Dad, she said suddenly. They need to know. Are you sure they're ready for this? Alex asked. It's going to be a shock. Emma looked at her brother, at the man who'd been given up for dead and somehow found his way back to her. They've been waiting for this moment for 10 years, she said. They may not know it, but they've been waiting. As the sun began to set over the intersection where their lives had collided once again, Emma and Alex walked away from the accident scene together. There would be paperwork to fill out, questions to answer, and a family to rebuild. But for the first time in 10 years, Emma Mitchell wasn't walking alone, and neither was her brother. The long road home had finally led them back to each other, and this time, neither of them was letting go.